Orcas kill great whites. They've been filmed flipping 6-meter sharks into tonic immobility off Mossel Bay, removing livers with something approaching surgical precision. Off Western Australia, in 2019 and 2021, groups of killer whales hunted and killed blue whales, the largest animals alive, ramming them, drowning them, feeding preferentially on their tongues. Marine mammal scientist Robert Pitman, who documented many of these encounters and published the Australian blue whale findings in Marine Mammal Science in 2022, has described killer whales as the top predator. That ranking is mostly accurate, but there is one healthy animal that does not appear on the adult kill list. Physeter macrocephalus, the sperm whale, is the largest toothed predator alive on Earth. Not the largest whale, not the largest mammal, the largest toothed predator. A whale that actively hunts, that carries permanent sucker scars from battles with giant squid, that free dives past 1,000 meters into total darkness and returns with prey clenched in its jaws. The Smithsonian Ocean's own documentation, in older sperm whales, circular sucker mark wounds from giant squid suckers overlap each other so densely that individual scars can no longer be separated. Every adult is marked. This isn't a filter feeder straining krill through baleen. Physeter macrocephalus is a hunting machine built at a scale the ocean hasn't matched since the Miocene, and the full argument for what it actually represents as a predator, as an architect of the abyss, and as a living climate mechanism is considerably stranger and more consequential than any of the apex celebrities audiences typically follow. Start with the hierarchy, because the hierarchy is the claim. In October 1997, approximately 35 killer whales attacked a pod of 9 adult and large subadult sperm whales about 130 kilometers off central California. The encounter lasted roughly 4 hours. Pitman, Balance, Mesnick, and Chivers documented the attack in detail, publishing in Marine Mammal Science in 2001. At least one sperm whale was killed and partially eaten. Others were seriously wounded. Pitman's paper concluded that killer whale predation represents a much more important selective force in shaping life history traits of sperm whales than previously assumed. Orcas do attack sperm whales. That's the documented record. Pitman's 1997 encounter involved 35 killers against 9 sperm whales, roughly a 4-to-1 numerical advantage, and the orcas still didn't eliminate the group. What the literature also shows, consistently across every reviewed source, is that no peer-reviewed study has documented a confirmed kill of a clearly healthy adult male sperm whale by a killer whale pod. Every well-documented lethal encounter involves adult females, subadults, or animals isolated from a group. A 2013 scientific report study played killer whale vocalizations to 5 male sperm whales off Andenes, Norway. All 5 responded behaviorally, surfacing and initiating social contact, confirming that males perceive orcas as a meaningful threat. The behavioral response of males to orca sounds and the behavioral response of orcapods to healthy males are very different calculations. A female sperm whale reaches around 12.5 meters and roughly 15 metric tons. A full-grown bull runs 15 to 18 meters and typically 32 to 50 metric tons, roughly 3 times female mass. The Sea-Watch Foundation's species fact sheet documents male length up to 19.2 meters, female up to 12.5 meters, and male mass up to 45,000 kilograms. The momentum of that animal at depth, moving at full swimming speed, is a different category of physics problem than anything a pod of orcas encounters when targeting a dolphin or a seal. Globally, as Pitman noted in a 2013 Wired-documented Sri Lanka encounter, only a handful of orca groups have even developed the skill to prey on sperm whales at all. The apex predator of the ocean targets a specific subset of sperm whales, calves, juveniles, adult females in certain configurations, and treats the largest bulls as something to be assessed rather than hunted. The hierarchy. Corrected. Orcas are the most dangerous confirmed natural predator of female sperm whales and young. Healthy adult bulls sit in a functionally different tier. Not immune, no animal is immune from group attack, but operating at a scale and a physical capability that substantially changes the risk equation. That physical scale isn't static. Sperm whales grow in two distinct modes depending on sex, and those modes produce two functionally different apex strategies. Female sperm whales live in warm, lower latitude waters, grouped into multi-generational social units. They dive to hunt, typically reaching 300 to 800 meters. They're efficient, coordinated, and social. A unit containing roughly 10 to 12 females and their immature offspring, stable across decades, according to Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell's work at Dalhousie University. Male sperm whales are a different ecological organism. They leave their natal units somewhere between age 4 and 21, form loose bachelor aggregations, and progressively migrate toward colder, higher latitude water as they age. Males continue growing through their teens and 20s, reaching physical maturity somewhere around age 50. By then, a large bull's square-shaped head, which, as Sea-Watch Foundation documents, occupies at least 1/3 of the body, is so hypertrophied relative to the rest of the animal that it barely resembles the sleeker profile of a female. Ted Cranford's 1999 CT scan study in Marine Mammal Science demonstrated extreme hypertrophy and size sexual dimorphism in the cephalic structures when sperm whale heads were compared, normalized for body size, to smaller odontocetes. The nose of a fully mature bull can account for roughly 40% of total body length when the entire spermaceti complex is measured. Two apex modes then: the warm water matriarchal social forager and the solitary cold water deep diving colossus that outweighs her by a factor of 3. The orca pressure on females and calves is genuine, documented, and geographically distributed across the eastern North Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Caribbean, and Australian waters. It's precisely that sustained selective pressure, concentrated on calves, juveniles, and adult females, especially isolated individuals, that shaped the most remarkable group defense behavior in the ocean. When killer whales approach a pod with calves, what happens next has been documented precisely. Adults form what Japanese whaling scientist Katsuo Nishiwaki first formally named and described in 1962, after observing sperm whales responding to a harpooned companion. The margarite formation, named after the daisy flower. Adults position themselves in a circle, heads angled inward toward the center, flukes pointing radially outward. Calves and injured animals are placed inside the circle. What the encircling orcas face is a rotating wall of the most powerful tails in the ocean. An adult sperm whale's flukes are heavy, broad, and deeply notched, capable of what multiple researchers have described as potentially lethal strikes. What the margarite creates geometrically is a situation where any orca attempting to reach a calf must close with an animal whose tail is pointed directly at it, and where approaching from multiple directions simultaneously exposes multiple attackers to simultaneous fluke strikes at once. Pitman's 2001 California documentation describes what happened when the formation held, and what happened when it broke. When killer whales pulled one sperm whale from the rosette, one or two sperm whales left the formation to flank and guide the isolated animal back, exposing themselves to increased attack in the process. Social altruism at documented cost. The formation has limits. Pitman noted that the 1997 group, despite maintaining the rosette, was in a situation where it was quite possible that the entire herd died as a result of injuries. The margarite reduces risk dramatically. It doesn't eliminate it. In 2024, off Bremer Canyon in Western Australia, researchers filmed sperm whales releasing large reddish fecal clouds during an orca attack and sweeping their tails through the plume, behavior that appeared to disrupt the attack, though whether that's deliberate deployment or stress response remains scientifically open. There is one behavior that has nothing to do with predators and everything to do with anatomy. Researchers studying sperm whales off Sri Lanka and the Azores have observed groups floating at or just below the surface in near total stillness. Not on their sides, as marine mammals typically rest, but vertically, heads up, bodies aligned like buoys. The groups drift motionless, sometimes for 10 or 15 minutes before the spell breaks. The explanation traces directly to anatomy. The spermaceti organ, the massive barrel-shaped structure filling the bulk of the sperm whale's enormous head, contains a waxy lipid that remains liquid at body temperature. Liquid wax is buoyant. The head is at least 1/3 of the animal's total length. A resting whale with a neutrally or positively buoyant forward third simply orients head up in the water column, no active swimming required. Field researchers and photographers encountering resting pods have described the visual as genuinely alien. A field of vertical marine pillows, motionless in open water. The spermaceti organ's passive buoyancy is well-established physics. What Malcolm Clark proposed in 1978 across 3 linked papers in the Journal of the Marine Biological Association of the United Kingdom goes considerably further. Clark, who the Independent's obituary called an international expert on 2 animals which remain among the most mysterious on the planet, the sperm whale and the giant squid, proposed that the whale doesn't just float on warm spermaceti. Researchers hypothesized that it can actively modify the organ's density during a dive. The mechanism, as Clark laid it out in the 1978 buoyancy paper, cool seawater drawn through the right nasal passage contacts the spermaceti, dropping its temperature by approximately 3 degrees Celsius. That cooling increases the oil's density. Researchers calculate the buoyancy modification at roughly 80 to 90 kilograms of lift change in a whale weighing more than 30 metric tons. At depths greater than 200 meters, Clark argued, this could allow something close to neutral buoyancy, gliding during descent without constant active swimming, then rewarming the organ through dense blood capillary networks during ascent to restore positive buoyancy for the return. The appeal is obvious. Nature independently engineering a variable buoyancy system. At least one underwater robotics paper has explicitly adopted Clark's model as the design basis for a biomimetic autonomous vehicle. The caveats matter. Norris and Harvey, in a 1972 NASA technical report that explicitly critiqued Clark's earlier hypothesis, calculated that the temperature-driven density change is modest enough relative to total whale mass that it couldn't function as primary propulsion. Miller and colleagues' 2004 work in the Journal of Experimental Biology, tagging sperm whales and tracking swimming gaits, found buoyancy changes that fit passive rather than active thermodynamic control. The hypothesis was never disproven. It remains biologically plausible, but the acoustic function of the spermaceti complex carries substantially more experimental support. The current scientific consensus treats the acoustic role as primary, with buoyancy as a possible secondary effect. The word spermaceti, while on the subject, it came from early whalers who cracked open the head of a harvested whale, encountered the waxy liquid and, not knowing what they were looking at, mistook it for semen. That naming error became the animal's common name before anyone understood they were looking at one of the most sophisticated acoustic organs in vertebrate evolutionary history. The primary function of the spermaceti complex is sound production, specifically the loudest biological sounds ever measured. Air is forced through the phonic lips, anatomically the museau du singe, the monkey's lips, at the anterior end of the right nasal passage. The resulting click travels back through the spermaceti organ, reflects off a frontal air sac, then travels forward through the junk, a stack of lens-shaped spermaceti pools that focuses the acoustic energy into a narrow, highly directional forward beam. The recycled air allows continuous click production during a dive without surfacing. Merle and colleagues, publishing in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in 2003, measured on-axis source levels up to 236 decibels referenced to 1 micropascal, and concluded, the sound levels measured make sperm whale clicks by far the loudest of sounds recorded from any biological source. Zimmer and colleagues, publishing in the same journal in 2005, confirmed the narrow forward beam geometry and inferred on-axis levels approaching 235 decibels for the primary pulse. Those clicks at operational depths reconstruct a three-dimensional acoustic map of the surrounding water column in total darkness. Regular clicks at 1 to 2 per second allow detection, tracking, and approach. The accelerating creak sequences, up to 220 clicks per second during a terminal buzz phase, mark the final approach to a specific target. Norris and Merle proposed formally in 1983 in The American Naturalist that the click intensity might be sufficient to acoustically stun or debilitate prey. At 230 plus decibels, the physics of the idea are at least worth examining. The field evidence, however, runs the other way. Fay and colleagues, publishing in Scientific Reports in 2016, used digital tags on foraging sperm whales and found that during the terminal buzz, the final approach, the whales reduce their source levels by 20 to 40 decibels, the opposite of what a stunning strategy would require. The stun hypothesis is a physically motivated extrapolation. The data currently available doesn't support it. The 236 decibel clicks are a long-range acoustic mapping system operating in darkness at depth. That is their confirmed ecological function. What the prey can do with that information, 3/4 of a kilometer below the surface, is essentially nothing. The abyss is where the monopoly operates. Stomach content analyses across multiple ocean basins, Japan, California, the Azores, the Southern Ocean, New Zealand, Tasmania, converge on the same dietary picture. Cephalopods dominant, oceanic squid comprising the bulk, with deep-water fish and resistant sharks filling the remainder. The species list running through published beak analyses includes giant squid, Architeuthis ducks, and the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltonii, the latter the world's largest living invertebrate by mass, reaching up to 6 meters total length and spending most of its life between 1,000 and 2,000 meters depth. The evidence of these encounters is written on the hunters. Sucker scars from giant squid suckers appear on the skin of adult sperm whales, in older individuals overlapping to the point of indistinction. Suction swallowing allows sperm whales to take large prey intact, which is why stomach content analyses find indigestible cephalopod beaks accumulating in extraordinary numbers. Clark's diet analyses estimated that at roughly 10 meals per day, a single whale's daily squid count runs into the hundreds. No other large predator shares this niche. Great white sharks can't sustain foraging at 1,000 meters. Orcas, despite their documented range and intelligence, can't repeatedly dive to the depths where the largest squid live. The sperm whale's primary prey base, the giant and colossal squid of the bathypelagic zone, is exclusively its own. The scale of that predation, aggregated across a global population operating in every deep ocean basin, rivals industrial human fishing in estimated annual biomass removed, and does so from a prey base that no surface fishery can reach. The exact population level figures remain debated, but the order of magnitude comparison is consistent in the literature. A population of large tooth predators extracting from a resource that no other apex species can access at all. That level of predation requires a dive system engineered beyond anything surface physiology can produce. WHOI research cites dives exceeding 1,200 meters lasting more than an hour. Malcolm Clark's 1976 observational work off Durban, South Africa, 2 large adult males diving in water more than 3,193 meters deep, with dive times of 82 and 83 minutes. Stomachs containing bottom-dwelling sharks, suggests capability in the 2,000 to 3,000 meter class for large bulls, though this is single-source observational evidence. The Sea-Watch Foundation's species fact sheet cites 3,200 meters as a documented extreme. Routine foraging happens in the 400 to 1,200 meter range. The upper capability is a different matter. At 1,000 meters, hydrostatic pressure is 100 atmospheres. Nitrogen at that pressure dissolves into blood and tissue at concentrations that would kill a human diver. Sperm whales survive repeated dives to these depths because their physiology substantially changes what happens to nitrogen. Progressive lung compression causes alveolar collapse as depth increases. Gas exchange surfaces physically close, terminating nitrogen uptake into blood before significant supersaturation occurs. A bradycardia response reduces heart rate and limits blood flow to extremities. Residual air shifts into rigid cranial sinuses, spaces not perfused with blood and therefore unable to transfer dissolved gas. The combination dramatically reduces decompression injury risk compared to any surface-breathing mammal operating at those pressures. Completely eliminates it? No. Analysis of sperm whale skeletal material has found dysbaric osteonecrosis, bone damage consistent with chronic decompression stress. The adaptations substantially mitigate the risk. The species isn't bends-proof, but the injury rate they produce is compatible with a foraging strategy involving multiple daily deep dives across a decades-long lifespan. The oxygen system provides the other half. Sperm whale blood hemoglobin concentration runs around 22 grams per deciliter, roughly twice human oxygen binding capacity. Blood volume is approximately 20% of total body weight. The skeletal muscle is so saturated with myoglobin that fresh sperm whale flesh is near black. The meat turns the color of a bruise. Published data put sperm whale muscle myoglobin at roughly 80 milligrams per gram of wet muscle weight, approximately 10 times the concentration in human skeletal muscle. A 2013 science study traced the evolutionary trajectory from roughly 6 milligrams per gram in Eocene whale ancestors to the extreme modern values, confirming that deep diving drove this molecular adaptation across tens of millions of years. Blood oxygen, muscle oxygen, collapsed lungs, cardiovascular shunting. A biological deep ocean vehicle that builds its own pressurized oxygen supply and shuts down non-essential systems on the way down. The social system behind all of this bears nothing resembling the solitary monster mythology. Rendell and Whitehead's 2003 paper in Proceedings of the Royal Society B documented sperm whale social units in the South Pacific and Caribbean between 1985 and 2000, organized into vocal clans with ranges spanning thousands of kilometers, identifiable by their repertoire of codas, stereotyped patterns of 3 to 40 clicks produced by females in social contexts. The coda dialects are stable over years. A unit recorded in 1987 shows the same vocal pattern on re-recording in 1993. Rendell and Whitehead concluded that culture, socially transmitted behavior, may thus be a more important determinant of sperm whale population structure than genes or geography. Schultz, Whitehead, Giro, and Rendell tracked a single 7-member social unit off Dominica for 41 days in early 2005. 5 adult females, 1 juvenile male, 1 male calf, assigning individual coda vocalizations by measuring interpulse intervals in the acoustic signal. Adult females vocalized at roughly equal rates. The calf and its mother carried significantly different coda repertoires from each other and from the rest of the unit. The researchers propose this facilitates mother-calf reunions, while the shared adult repertoire signals unit identity to the broader social group. Alloparental care is documented. Adults babysit calves that aren't their own offspring. Shane Giro's Dominica sperm whale project has tracked individual long-term relationships within units containing up to 70 individuals across multiple generations. The Margarite fortress isn't a reflex. It's the product of a social architecture that maintains coordinated, multi-generational relationships, transmits vocal dialects across ocean basins, and deploys collective defense with enough discipline that adults will break formation at personal risk to rescue an isolated companion. One chapter in the documentary record stands apart from modern behavioral observation. On November 20th, 1820, the whale ship Essex out of Nantucket was struck and sunk in the South Pacific, roughly 2,000 nautical miles off South America. The crew estimated the attacking whale at 80 to 85 feet and approximately 80 tons. First mate Owen Chase published his 1821 account as Narrative of the most extraordinary and distressing shipwreck of the whale ship Essex. 19 of 20 crew survived the initial sinking. Most subsequently died from exposure, starvation, and dehydration. Survivors resorted to cannibalism. 8 men reached land. What Chase described, and what makes the Essex case notable in the literature, is the sequence. The whale struck once. It turned, moved off, turned again, and struck a second time, deliberately, against a ship already damaged. A second whale ship, the Anne Alexander, was sunk by a sperm whale in the Pacific in August 1851, the animal reportedly already carrying harpoon irons from previous encounters. In July 1841, sailing aboard the Acushnet, Herman Melville met the teenage son of Owen Chase, who lent him a copy of his father's narrative. Melville also drew on accounts of Mocha Dick, a scarred albino bull reported near the island of Mocha off the Chilean coast, notorious for attacking whaling vessels. Moby Dick appeared in 1851, with the Essex narrative serving as its structural spine. The historical record frames this correctly. The documented attacks targeted whaling vessels actively pursuing sperm whales. Whatever drove the behavior, whether defensive or responses to specific acoustic and physical provocations from the hunt, the documented pattern is agency directed against a specific source of threat. Not predation on humans, not random aggression. The record is what it is. Now for the chapter that changes the entire frame. After the predator biology settles, after the deep water raids, the acoustic mapping, the fortress tactics, the size advantage over orcas, the sperm whale turns out to be doing something else simultaneously that places its global significance in a completely different register. Lavery and colleagues, publishing in Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2010, quantified the mechanism precisely. The whale pump. Sperm whales dive to depth and feed on iron-rich squid. They defecate at the surface. The feces are iron-rich and liquid. They diffuse rapidly through the photic zone, the upper ocean layer where sunlight penetrates and photosynthesis is possible. Iron is a limiting nutrient for phytoplankton growth in many ocean regions. Where iron arrives, phytoplankton blooms follow. Phytoplankton are the base of the marine food web, but more critically here, they are the planet's primary biological carbon sink. They take CO2 from the atmosphere during photosynthesis. When they die, a fraction of that carbon sinks to the deep ocean floor, locked from the atmosphere for centuries to millennia. Lavery's team measured the iron fertilization effect directly in the Southern Ocean and calculated the resulting stimulus to carbon export. Roman and colleagues, publishing in Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment in 2014, expanded the analysis to whale populations globally. The population-level carbon cycling contribution before 20th century commercial whaling reduced global sperm whale numbers to roughly 1/3 of pre-industrial levels, as the IUCN estimates, represents a substantial component of oceanic carbon sequestration that the whaling era erased alongside the whales themselves. In 2023, Dominica announced plans for the world's first dedicated sperm whale marine reserve. By 2025, the Sperm Whale Reserve Act was enacted into law, establishing legal prohibitions on harming, fishing, harassing, hunting, possessing, removing, or trading sperm whales or cetaceans within Dominica's maritime zones. The same waters where Shane Guerrero and the Dominica Sperm Whale Project have tracked individual social units for years. The reserve addresses the threats that replaced whaling as the primary pressure on the species: ship strikes on resting whales at the surface, fishing gear entanglement, and underwater noise disturbance. Sperm whales rest near the surface in those characteristic vertical postures, heads up, largely motionless, and they rest precisely where large vessel traffic runs. The IUCN classifies sperm whales as vulnerable. Population remains at roughly 1/3 of pre-whaling levels. Females produce one calf every 4 to 6 years. Recovery, even under full protection, is slow, by definition for an animal that reaches physical maturity at 50 years of age. The case for the apex hierarchy rests on documented physiology and behavior, not mythology. Adult bulls at 32 to 50 metric tons, with a head comprising at least a third of their body length, occupy a tier that orca groups have no confirmed record of penetrating. Their dive system, collapsed lungs, rigid sinuses, hemoglobin-dense blood, near black myoglobin-saturated muscle, lets them operate at depths where no other large predator forages regularly. Their 236 decibel biosonar maps prey in complete darkness. The margarite defense, first formally described in 1962, converts a social group into a rotating wall of lethal strikes. And the dietary throughput they generate, primarily giant and colossal squid extracted from depths that commercial fishing can't reach, occurs at a scale rivaling industrial human fishing across an entirely separate prey base. The dimension audiences don't anticipate. The same animal, in the act of feeding at depth and breathing at the surface, is fertilizing the ocean's carbon pump. Its feces seed phytoplankton blooms. Those blooms pull carbon from the atmosphere. The whale's existence is stitched into Earth's carbon cycle in a way that made the 20th century whaling industry, when assessed in full ecological terms, an act of large-scale climate interference alongside everything else it was. Dominica's reserve is a start. The ship lanes crossing over resting sperm whale pods in warm water habitat. The long lines, the vessel strikes, these are the ongoing pressures. An animal that takes 50 years to reach physical maturity and produces one calf every several years can't absorb sustained attrition the way faster reproducing species can. The ocean's ranked apex-toothed predator is also its living carbon engineer. Losing the one means losing the other.